Remembering Talat Pasha and the beginning of terror murders, I'd like to welcome all speakers and guests to our panel. These are the days Turkey remember its martyrs. March 18 is a day we solemnly remember all our fallen as well as the victory in Gallipoli. Our diplomats who became the victims of Armenian terror organization Asala, GISEC, ARA, and their affiliated terrorist groups such as October 3, Orly, 9th of June, etc. Also need to be mentioned here. Turkey is the only country in the world who lost her diplomats in such an appalling number and for so long between 1973 and 1984. 31 Turkish diplomats and members of their immediate families had been murdered by these terrorist organizations since the terror wave first took the lives of the Consul General of Turkey, Mehmet Baydar, and Consul of Turkey, Bahadır Demir, in Santa Barbara, California, on January 27, 1973. Against this truth, Armenia and the part of the Armenian diaspora, in fact, who are among the defenders of the Armenian genocide allegations, engage in activities that commemorate, glorify terrorist organizations and the terrorists. There is a monument erected in memory of Asala members in the Yarablur State Military Cemetery located in Yerevan, capital of Armenia. Memorial ceremonies are held on the anniversary of the death of the terrorist named Monte Melkonyan, one of the leaders of Asala, who died in the Armenia's onslaught on Nagorno-Karabakh in 1993 and was declared a national hero by the Armenian authorities. Many books that portray Asala terrorists as heroes are published with the official support of Armenia. Granting Armenian citizenship to the JCAG terrorist Hampik Sasunyan by Armenian authorities, who killed the Turkish consul general in Los Angeles in 1982 and was sentenced to life imprisonment in the United States of America. Attempts of the Armenian circles for the release of Sasunyan, transfer of Gurgen Yanıkyan's corpse, who carried out the attack in which our Consul General Mehmet Baydar and Deputy Consul Bahadır Demir were martyred in 1973 to Yarablur Military Cemetery in May 2019. The commemoration of Zohrab Sarkisyan, one of the perpetrators of the terrorist attack in Ankara Esenboğa Airport in 1982, at a ceremony held in the military cemetery in August 2019, and the commemoration of the perpetrators of the bomb attack targeting our Lisbon embassy in 1983, called the Lisbon Five by the diaspora Armenians in various countries, are other recent examples of the glorification of terrorism. Incidents such as threatening message sent to our Beirut embassy on January 1st, 2019, and the burning of the Turkish flag on April 24 demonstrate the extent of the aggressive attitude towards Turkey. The demonstrations and protests in front of Turkish embassies and consulates generals, which were initiated simultaneously by radical Armenian groups in many countries after the conflict that started between Armenia and Azerbaijan on September 27, are undoubtedly worrisome. Most recently, the press release made by Asala on January 20, 2021, on the pretext of his 46th anniversary, explicitly points out that Asala invites its members to engage in terrorist attacks. Undoubtedly, with all these criminal actions and discourses and an open call to violence and terror targeting Turkey and the Turkish people, the terrorist threat is still alive. Following the terror murder of Cemal Pasha in Tbilisi on July 21, 1922, 16 months after the murder of Talat Pasha in Berlin, for more than half a century, no Armenian terror was in the news. Any convincing explanation for the return of Armenian terror and accompanying allegations after such a long period of the time must certainly be discussed in another meeting. Indeed, finding a rationale for such two forcefully connected frenzies of terror can only be task of utter and yet very required speculation. Having said these, I would like to introduce you the speakers of the panel, including myself. Dr. Maxime Gouen of France, born in April 9, 1985 in, again, France, 2005 Bachelor in History, Université de Bordeaux, 3, 2005-2006 first year of Master, Modern and History, École Normale Supérieure de Lyon and Université Lyon 2, 2009-2010 second year of Master, Contemporary History, Université de Paris 1 Sorbonne, degree obtained with honors, mentioned très bien. 2011-2019 doctorate in history, Middle East Technical University, unanimously approved, subject the relations between the French Republic and the Armenian committees from 1918 to 1923. Researches at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs Archives, Paris and Nantes, Military Archives, Vincennes, National Archives, Pierre Refit, Archives of the Senate, Paris, National Library, Manuscript Division, Paris, UK National Archives, Kew Gardens, London, National Archives and Records Administration, College Park, Maryland, Library of Congress, Manuscript Division, Washington, District of Columbia, American Board of Commissioner for Foreign Missions, Harvard University, Hoover Institution, Stanford, California. 2011-2013, researcher at the International Strategic Research Organization in Ankara. Since 2013, scholar in the residence at the Center of the Eurasian Studies, AVIM, Ankara. The second speaker, Associated Professor Dr. Ömer Lütfi Taşçıoğlu. Associated Professor Taşçıoğlu graduated from the war colleges in 1983. He retired from the Turkish Armed Forces in 2001, following a career which spanned 31 years, including positions abroad as military attaché, and he also participated in active combat duty in the 1974 Cyprus Peace Operation and became a veteran. He also graduated from the International Relations Department of Faculty of Political Sciences at Ankara University, English Language and Literature Department of Faculty of Arts at Istanbul University, and from the Turkish War Colleges. He completed his PhD thesis entitled The Claims of Massacre and Genocide Concerning Turkish-Armenian Relations, according to primary sources at International Relations Department of Gazi University in 2014, and he was promoted to associate professor in 2020. His published books include Historical Facts in Turkish-Armenian Relations, the USA Policy of Globalization and the Role of Turkey, Historical, Political, and Legal Facts Relating to Turkish-Armenian Relations, and Foreign Countries' Plans to Disintegrate Turkey. He has a number of peer-reviewed journal articles in the field of international relations. After retirement from the military, Dr. Taşçıoğlu worked at the Turkish Chief of General Staff's Strategic Research Center, SAREM. He is a member of the Board of Directors of the National Strategic Research Council, the Talat Paşa Committee, and ANKA Institute, its scientific advisory board. Currently, he is a guest lecturer at Ufuk University and Ankara Hacı Bayram Veli University. Finally, me, Atun, Professor Doctor, is a Turkish Cypriot and veteran of Turkish nation in Cyprus. He received in 1971 Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Baghdad University, Iraq in 1987, Master of Science in Civil Engineering from Century University, California, USA, and 1989 PhD in Civil Engineering from Century University in Texas, USA. Became an associated professor on 1998 and full professor on 2005 at nearest University Nicosia, Turkish Republic of North Cyprus. He is the author of 13 textbooks and 4 lecture notes written in English, currently in use at the nearest university. His second major is International Relations and received in 2015 Master of Science and 2018 PhD in International Relations from Girne American University, Kyrenia, Turkish Republic of North Cyprus. He is the founder of Samtay Foundation, which released 47 books on the cultural history of the Turkish people in Cyprus. He is the author of 7 books on Cyprus history and 18 books on Cyprus politics. Appointed by the President of the Republic as the negotiator and the team leader to the Turkish-Cyprus delegation for the subcommittee discussions of the Annan Plan between Cyprus Turkish Cypriots and Cyprus Greek Cypriots, organized under the auspice of the United Nations on February, March, April 2004. He was elected as a member of parliament in 1976, appointed as a political advisor to the president of the Turkish Republic of North Cyprus in 2001 to Mr. Raif Denktaş, and to the deputy prime minister in 2002 to Mr. Serdar Denktaş, and 2010 to the third president of the republic, Mr. Derviş Eroğlu. Appointed as the chairman to the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus Development Bank in 2005, appointed by the President of the Republic to the Presidential Advisory Board on May 2010, and elected as the chairman of the Turkish Media Forum in 2013. Since 2002, over 2,500 of his articles on international politics published in local and international newspapers and 197 news sites all over the world. He is now the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and the lecturer in the International Politics in Cyprus Science University, Kyrenia, Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. On 2016, he was appointed as the founding rector of the International Aydın University in North Cyprus, still in establishment phase. Now it is my questions to my colleagues. Today, the 100th anniversary of the martyr Talat Paşa year, we organized this panel to remind the Turkish nation of his murder and the vindication of the killer by the court. Who is Talat Paşa? Mehmet Talat, born in September 1, 1874, assassinated in March 15, 1921, is the founding leader of the Ottoman Freedom Association and one of the founders and leading leaders of the Committee of Union and Progress. Talat Bey, who played an important role in preparation of the 1908 revolution, was one of the most important actors that shaped the politics of the Ottoman Empire between 1908 and 1918. After the Babi Ali raid, He became one of the most important determinants of the state's politics, and he was appointed as Minister of Internal Affairs in the Said Halim Pasha cabinet. Talat Bey, together with the Enver Pasha and Cemal Pasha, assumed a role in the Ottoman Empire's entry into World War I for the defense of empire's land and the temporary relocation of some Armenians. He was appointed as the Grand Vizier in the 1917. After the World War I was lost, he dissolved the Committee of Union and Progress and left the country with Cemal and Enver Pashas. He was killed by an Armenian Hardenberg Street in Berlin in March 15, 1921. I would like to give a start to the panel by mentioning the Turkish-German relations. My question is, Dr. Guen, why did the Ottoman state take the decision on forced migration? What were the main reasons? Dr. Guen, this seat is yours.
Thank you, Professor Atun. The decision taken in 1915 was a military decision taken primarily for military purposes, answering military necessities. What military purpose, what military necessities? First of all, the insurrections in the East. The Armenian Revolutionary Organization established at the end of the 19th century. I don't have time to enter into the chronological details in the background, but these nationalist revolutionary parties organized insurrection in cities and in the countryside, actually, such as Van, Erzurum, Bitlis, Sivas, etc., with the aim to help the Russian invasion of Eastern Anatolia and to make junction with some 50,000 Armenian volunteers fighting on the side of the Russian army. 50,000 is a figure used by the United Armenian Delegations. This is not a Turkish figure. And actually, the British Council in Tbilisi, Tiflis, at that time, estimated the numbers to be about 45,000 at the end of October 1914. So before the recruitment was completely fulfilled. And Soğomon Tehliryan, the theorist we will widely discuss during this panel, as far as we know, was one of these volunteers, and more precisely in the unit led by Antranik Ozanian, usually named Antranik. So the first problem was in the east and the northeast. The second kind of problem was in the south, with the insurrection in Zeytun, and the delegates of the insurrection in Zeytun estimated the numbers of the insurgents to be 15,000. And in other parts of Chukurova and the Ramkavar, one of the main Armenian nationalists, estimated the insurgents to be 25,000, sorry, with the aim to provoke an Anglo-French landing from Cyprus to Mersin, to Iskenderun, or both, to cut the railroad connecting Istanbul and Anatolia to the Arab provinces, which was something very feared by the Ottoman and German officers at that time. And the third, smaller but not negligible reasons, was the insurrection around Bursa to cut the supplies between Istanbul and the Ottoman soldiers fighting in Çanakkale. Initially, the Ottoman government tried classical methods to attack the insurgents with the few remaining gendarmerie and military units. Police operations, the best known being the operation of April 24, to arrest 235. Actually, these 225 were not all arrests on April 24, but I skip these details. But after the rebellion at Van, the most successful rebellion at Van, and even more during the months which took place in April, and even more during the months of May, when the example of Van was followed by incidents in Sivas, for example, the fear increased in the government circles, the fear for the supplies, the fear for the railroad in the south, the fear for the road in the east and the northeast. So the government decided to use more radical methods and to use a technique that emerged in 18th century, but which was theorized and widely practiced at the very end of 19th century and the very beginning of 20th century. In Cuba, by the Spanish army against the Cuban separatists, in Philippines, by the US Army against the Philippine separatists, and in South Africa by the British Army against the Boers, with descendant of Dutch, mostly Dutch, a bit French as well, but mostly Dutch settlers. And the basic idea behind this method used by the Ottoman army, but also by armies of Western democracies before, is an insurgent is a human being. An insurgent eats and drinks. As a result, an insurgency is dangerous only if helped by a significant part of the civilian population. And it does not matter if these civilians help willingly, by force, or both. Because in military terms, it changes nothing. The supplies is here. So if you cannot defeat an insurgency by classical methods, you have to relocate all or part of the civilians to deprive the insurgents of this crucial support. So it's all about supplies in a sense. The Armenian insurgents knew the Ottoman Empire and attacked the road and supplies, and the Ottoman state answered in cutting the supplies of these insurgents. And just a very short remark of pure military history. I don't think it's a pure coincidence if the number of forced relocation in world history increased at the very end of 19th century, and particularly was used by the Ottoman Empire at this moment, because the end of 19th century in purely military history is a time when wife emerged in using smokeless powder, and they can kill a man 1 kilometer away, which means an entrenched position becomes much more difficult to take by force than as late as 1880s. So all these conditions explain that the decision taken in 1915 has nothing to do with religious or racist prejudice and everything to do with national security concern. I have to mention that I discussed, as you asked me, the decision. I did not discuss the consequences, which are another question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Goen. It was an excellent explanation. Dr. Taşçıoğlu, my second question is to you. Can you please make a brief summary of Turkish-German relations during the World War I?
Okay. Germany's activities in the Ottoman Empire started with the efforts of the military delegation headed by Moltke to reorganize the Ottoman army. Upon his return to Germany, Moltke reported that the Ottomans could be connected to Berlin by a railroad crossing the Balkans, so that Germany would have the opportunity for the new generation to colonize Mesopotamia and Palestine. Professor Wilhelm Roche of Leipzig University argued that Germany should get Asian Turkey as its own share when the Ottoman Empire disintegrated. This information proves that the main purpose of Germany's alliance with the Ottoman Empire was to control the Caucasus and Middle East and to benefit from the natural resources of these regions. On the other hand, the relocation decision was taken with the offers and suggestions of the German officers in the Ottoman army. Schöbredichte, the German consul to Erzurum, sent a report to his ambassador on June 2, 1915. In this report, he informed that his negotiations with Enver Pasha on the displacement of Armenians ended positively, and Armenians in Erzurum would be immigrated to the Sancak of Zor. This report proves that German authorities were also aware of the forced migration decision and even consulted with the Ottoman government on this issue. Another source, which proves that Ottoman authorities made the relocation decision after consultation with Germany, is the Armenian priest and committee leader Vardapet Grigoris Balakyan, who was arrested on April 24, 1915 in Istanbul. In his book, Armenian Golgotha, Balakyan gives information about the relocation period. He says that the Turkish community in Germany held a meeting in Berlin in February 1914. At that meeting, the opening speech was addressed by Kolmar von der Großpascha. In his opening speech, Großpascha says that Russia has prepared a reform plan for the Armenians to disintegrate the Ottoman Empire. He says, to disrupt the Russian plan, the Ottomans must send 500,000 Armenians from the Ottoman-Russian borders to Aleppo and Mesopotamia. In return, the Arabs in whose lands the Armenians are settled should be transferred to the Ottoman-Russian borders. This information shows that Großpascha is the person who recommended the Ottoman authorities to remove the Armenians from war zones and to settle them in Syria. On the other hand, the General Staff Archive of the Ottoman Empire was smuggled into Germany by Hans von Zech, who served as the Ottoman Chief of General Staff between 1916 and 1918. This is also an indication that Germany was trying to hide the influence of German commanders on the forced migration decision. Germans also add that the information about the Armenian casualties does not reflect the facts. Dr. Paul Rohrbach, the German politician, wrote a letter to the Kaiser on January 6, 1918. He reported in this letter that 700,000 Armenians who fled to the Caucasus and Western Anatolia survived, and 300,000 Armenians continue to live in Western Anatolia. Count Berstov, the ambassador of Germany in Washington, made a statement to the Wolf Agency on June 6, 1915. He explained that all the alleged persecution stories against the Armenians were completely fabricated, and the news about the murder of Armenians were unfounded. Another German, Richard von Kühlmann, the German ambassador to Istanbul, reported to German Foreign Ministry that Armenian bands massacred a great number of Turks around Erzincan. However, despite all these facts, Germany preferred to accuse the Ottoman Empire instead of sharing the responsibility of the migration decision with it. I would like to conclude with the statement of the German officer Felix Kuze, who served as the chief of staff of the Third Ottoman Army during the First World War. The slogan that Armenians are victims of genocide is completely wrong. After the war, a large Armenian community remained alive. A certain part of the German public was working not for our ally, the Ottoman Empire, but for the Armenians. The Armenians managed to gain pity for themselves and made such propaganda for years. Now, we must see the facts. That's all I could say.
On the question. Thank you very much, Professor Taşçıoğlu. Here, before I proceed to the further questions, I would like to mention to the main events the assassination of Talat Pasha and the trial of the killer after the assassination following the World War I. The trial of the murder of Talat Pasha proved to be the most shameful comedy because the killer Tehliryan was found innocent, whilst the victim Talat Pasha was found guilty of killing Armenians previously in Turkey. The German judges gave into the Armenian and victors' pressures. Liman von Sanders and the German Protestant pastor Dr. Johannes Lepsius deposed in the court as experts. Liman von Sanders did mention anything about the German ambassador of the era and also him being the commander in the chief of Ottoman army. He did not testify against Talat Pasha, but he also did not tell the truth in full extent, but a quarter of it only. Accordingly, his testimony was against rather than pro. Although an appeal notice was sent to Bronsart von Schellendorf, he wasn't called as a witness to the court. After the final verdict of the court, he published an article in a newspaper as a reaction to the court's verdict. Talat Pasha was a minister of interior and later the prime minister of the Ottoman government. Although he was known for his friendship with Armenians until an assassin sent to kill him was caught, he was the one who was held personally responsible for all the wrongdoings during the process of the temporary relocation of some Armenians to the safe zones where there was no war. This relocation inside the empire was due to military obligation and was a necessity. It is known fact, even admitted by the League of Nations General Secretary, that the revolutionary Armenians were hitting the back supply lines and engaging units of the army in acts of sabotage when they were needed in Gallipoli to fight against the Allied landings. The General Secretary of the League of Nations had written that 200,000 Armenians sacrificed their lives in their fights for the Entente, trusting the promises given which were not kept when the war had ended. In reality, Talat Pasha was one of the three leaders of the Ottoman government and merely had carried out the process regulated by law. This was executed for the first time in Ottoman history by governors, valis, in the provinces where revolutionaries were hiding, feeding themselves, and sabotaging the army. General public may not be aware, but the Armenian lobby in California has managed to have their own one-sided version of the relocation included in lectures in high schools of the state recently, thus raising a generation with full hatred of Turks and their children living in USA, all USA citizens. Nowadays, a similar effort is being made in Germany based on the biased and very superficial knowledge of the German community about the relocation purposely called allegedly as genocide. This is derived from the very effective Armenian propaganda and the sense of solidarity while believing in only what they hear or read selectively without cross-checking or examining other and neutral documentations. Talat Pasha, the late prime minister of the Ittihadist Ottoman Empire, or Triumvir, had taken refuge in Germany in early November 1918 when the Ottoman Empire had to surrender to the Allies on October 30, 1918 with the Mudros ceasefire. The German revolutionists had set up an organization called Nemesis to revenge in their 9th Congress in October 1919 at Tiflis for the alleged atrocities by the Ottomans during the 1915 forced relocations caused by military necessities. If we recall that a week after the Armenian Republic was declared on May 28, 1918, they had signed a treaty of amity with the Turks and entered under the protection. However, a month after the Mudros ceasefire, this treaty was abrogated by the Armenian Republic, and provinces of Kars and Ardahan were occupied. December 2, while living in Germany, Talat Pasha was killed by Berlin in March 15, 1921. The district court had three judges, Dr. Lehenberg being the presiding judge, who converted an ordinary murder case into an international court of state politics and managed to portray the killer as someone in a state of temporary amnesia and mental defect or trance, and therefore he was irresponsible for his action. There was a jury made up of ordinary 12 persons. There were three defense attorneys, one of them a professor of law at Köln University. There were 12 expert witnesses, of whom 8 were physicians, neurologists, medical counsels, etc., who had not seen the killer before the murder but were invited later to give their expert opinion from the outside. 2 more and important expert witnesses were added. The first one was Johannes Lepsius, who was a priest associated for a long period with philanthropic activities for Armenians and founder of the German Eastern Mission or German Armenian Association. He was in fact a fanatic priest. In July 1915, at the time of the relocations in actual execution, he came to Istanbul but was not welcomed or received by the German embassy because of his fanaticism. He was, however, received once by Enver Pasha and had several contacts with the US ambassador Morgenthau, who gave him some of the old missionary reports, and the Armenian Patriarchate, who furnished stacks of alleged reports fabricated by themselves because nothing could have come by mail over land in such a time. The second expert witness was General Limon von Sanders, stationed in Turkey as head of the German military mission from 1913 until the end of the war, 1918. There was about 10,000 German officers or specialist soldiers in the Ottoman army, but none of them was invited as witness. General B. von Schellendorf, as the general staff and also deputy of Enver Pasha, Minister of War, knew and eyewitnessed every moment of the relocations because of his duty and title. He had authority to sign as deputy of Enver Pasha. He was suggested for this trial, but never invited to give his report as the best eyewitness of all operations. We have one district attorney, Mr. Golenik, but no other person or lawyer to speak in favor of the victim, Talat Pasha. Eventually, we will see how the district attorney Golenik gives into the pressure of the judges and arranged witnesses, and eventually he asks for the release of the culprit. Another important point is that no other person was interrogated or cross-examined, and the criminal Soğomon Tehliryan avoided answering real questions of the judge, while his words were taken for nothing but truth. The culprit was not only the actual killer, but was also the eye and expert witness. His word was accepted as the only truth but the truth, even when it was paradoxical to his other statements and physical possibilities. We will see only a few questions and answers which will demonstrate that the presiding judge was not investigating a simple premeditated murder, but he was putting on trial the history of another country based on statements of the culprit and some other expert witnesses, none of whom saw the murder nor the alleged massacres in another country some 6 years earlier. The questions asked by the presiding judge, defendant's lawyers, district attorney, and the answers given by the defendant and expert witness formed a real comedy during the trial. The conversations taken from the minutes of the process should be enough to show how the presiding judge, the defendant lawyers, and the witnessing psychiatrist built a childish narration, inverting, distorting, and fabricating facts to eventually deciding that his mother's spirit gave him the order to kill Talat, and hence he was innocent for doing what his mother had told him. He was not aware of what he was doing. I would like to outline some of the irrefutable facts on this delusionary or kangaroo trial and leave the final verdict to the intelligence and neutrality of the audience. The irony is that Germany is still unaware of the parody of this trial and still believes in an average war drama, which they may even include in their school textbooks as the verdict of genocide. The article of General Bronsart von Schellendorf, published in Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung, number 342, on July 24, 1921, about a month after the verdict, needs to be taken into consideration solemnly for a neutral German military overview. In the process of the Armenian assassin Tehliryan, witnesses were called who were unable to make any real statements or who were able only to relate what they had heard about the situation. Eyewitnesses who had seen the truth were not called to the trial. Why did one not take the statements of German officers who were assigned at the time and were there too to see results of the Armenian atrocities? Unfortunately, the trial in court was more comedy than being neutral and fair. This is what happened on the court, on the German court. I now would like to ask Dr. Guen, what were the discrepancies in Tehliryan's defense? What was the reason why the court approved them appealingly easily? The floor is yours, Dr. Guen.
Thank you, Professor Atun. First, to answer your first question, Tehliryan lied about almost everything, actually. He claimed he acted alone, and as you said, he found Talat Pasha by chance in the street of Berlin and saw his mother asking him to kill, etc. Actually, he was a member of Nemesis, of the terrorist group, especially created by the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, one of the main organizers of the rebellion in 1914-1915, to assassinate former Ottoman officials, former Azerbaijani officials, and loyal Armenians. And actually, Tehliryan, almost exactly 1 year before assassinating Talat Pasha, had assassinated a loyal Armenian who co-wrote the list of the suspects arrested in April 1915. So it was his first lie. Actually, even during the trial, not everybody believed he had acted alone. It was a bit too crude, but that's what he said. He also claimed he lost his whole family. at least for his father and his two uncles, it is false, because all these three men moved to Belgrade before the First World War and died of natural cause well after the First World War. His mother is an unclear case, so I will not enter in this case because I don't have enough element on her. But anyway, a part of his family, in any case, survived. He claimed before being killed his sister had been raped. Actually, he never had any sister. But the worst lie, the most important lie to justify the allegation that he was actually insane, is that he had been forcibly relocated and suffered a trauma that made him mentally insane. But actually, he moved to Belgrade with his father before the First World War and joined the Russian army in 1914 directly. He never was among the forcibly relocated Armenians. He never was a witness of any of the killings. There were cases of killings, not systematically, but there were cases. But the thing is, he never was a witness of that. It's even possible that he was one of the perpetrators of killings of Turks, because the volunteers units were particularly ferocious against the Muslim and particularly Turkish population. So that was the main lies of Tehliryan during his trial, lies that had been prepared not by himself, but by the people in charge of Nemesis, and particularly by Shan Natalie and by Johannes Lepsius. The personal participation of Johannes Lepsius is a finding of Yeşen Dursun, with a Turkish historian working in Germany. So regarding the trial, I'm not sure to completely agree with you regarding the prosecutor and the presiding judge, in the sense that the prosecutor tried to fight the arguments of defense, and at least in one case he obtained a success, because he obtained that the defense lawyer of Tehliryan cancelled their project to present 5 fake documents published by Aram Amdonian the year before as evidence against the victim. So the lawyers themselves, after the skepticism of the prosecutor, renounced using these fake documents, which is in itself not negligible, because, as you know, these fake documents are increasingly used during the last years. According to Ernst Jeck, who was a German friend of Talat, the president wanted Tehliryan to be sentenced, and it was much less because of the president than because of the jury, that they believed, that the court believed that Tehliryan was actually insane, and no matter if Talat was guilty or not, Tehliryan believed he was guilty and was insane in this result. Why? First of all, I think the jury could not check. The jury, as any jury in the world, was made of very ordinary persons, were left without arguments. But there is another question: why the jury was left without argument? Why the prosecutors was left so alone? The first reason is Germany was a weak state between the armistice in 1924-25. It was a country with a lot of political assassinations, especially by the far right, with insurrection by communists. Clearly, they had many other issues in mind. But there is another reasons for that, more specific to the year 1921. Because the year 1921 is the year when the Silesia issue was discussed and fixed. Poland, the ally of France, wanted to have the biggest part of Upper Silesia, because it's an economically interesting region, and obviously Germany wanted to have all or most of the same region. And as I said, France was supporting the Polish point of view, and Germany, as a defeated country, could not challenge alone. Germany was looking for the support of David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of UK. And David Lloyd George hated the Turks, and David Lloyd George thought sincerely, wrongly but sincerely, that the interest of British imperialism was to use Greek and, to a lesser extent, Armenian nationalism against Turkey. So from what Germany considered for some reasons to be its interest, it could be useful to leave this trial to be a mockery of trial. And one point I never saw in any publication, but I saw it in French documents. There was an attempt to create a Turkish counter-nemesis after the assassination of Talat to assassinate Armenian nationalist leaders in reprisals. And on the list, there was one British officer. I never found why this British officer in particular was targeted by the friends of Talat. All what I can say is perhaps, I insist on these words, perhaps this man was an intelligence agent who helped Nemesis to locate Talat. That's the only logical explanation I could find until a detailed research is conducted in the British intelligence records. And as you know, it takes easily 1 century until you have access to these documents. So it could enlighten the British factor, or more exactly the David Lloyd George factor, in the trial of Tehliryan. And just one last word, all these things were actually closely interconnected in the sense that by 1921, France was more and more supporting Turkey against Armenian and Greek nationalism and against British expansionism, leaving Adana and providing weapons, some of them for sale, some of them for free. And one of the numerous reasons France did that is David Lloyd George was not supporting the French point of view against Germany. There were many other reasons, including related to Turkey, including some ethical reasons, but clearly the German factor was a problem. So you see, this trial was one element in a very intermixed factor, intermixed issue of international relations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goen. It was excellent. Thanks a lot. Dr. Taşçıoğlu, I would like to hear your comments on the same issue. Of course, if you wish so.
Okay, thank you.
The floor is yours.
Okay. The trial was transformed into a theater stage where an effort was carried out to prove the unfounded Armenian allegations rather than a courtroom where a murderer was being tried.
Yes.
As a result, the court acquitted the murderer Soğomon Tehliryan. The court supported the criminal and tried to conceal Germany's contribution to the relocation decision by judging the Ottoman state instead of the murderer. This decision of the German court also shows invalidity of the statement that there are judges in Berlin. In the trial, a change of voice took place between the murderer and the victim. And instead of the murderer, the deceased and the Ottoman state were put on the defendant chair and tried. During the trial, unrelated individuals from many countries were summoned to the courtroom to testify in favor of the defendant. But Talat Paşa's wife and German officers serving in the Ottoman army were not invited to testify, even though they were on the witness list. The most important witness not invited to testify was General Friedrich Ronsard von Schellendorf, who sent a letter to German newspaper Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung and protested the decision. Since his letter was mentioned before, I don't want to repeat it. The release of Tehliryan encouraged the Armenians who saw that the murders committed were not requited, and it paved the way for the successive massacres of the other Ottoman statesmen. In this context, former Grand Vizier Said Halim Pasha was shot dead in Rome in 1921. And in 1922, politician Professor Dr. Bahattin Shakir and former Trabzon Governor Cemal Azmi were similarly shot dead by Armenian terrorists in the middle of the street in Berlin. These murders were followed by the murder of Cemal Pasha in Tiflis and almost all the statesmen who served in the Ottoman administration were killed within a year. I want to conclude this part with the statement of the son of Tehliryan, who spoke to the German Süddeutsche Zeitung newspaper 95 years after the assassination of Talat Paşa. The son of Tehliryan stated that his father could not be seen as a hero, since he was a liar and a murderer. He said that his father lied his defense at the court also. He explained that his father made a defense saying, "My 3 sisters were raped and my mother and father were shot," whereas his father had no sisters but 3 brothers. And his father migrated to Serbia to earn money before the war broke out. So his father was not subjected to forced migration either. The son of Tehliryan said that he did not understand why his death was accepted as a hero in Armenia, and asked that question: how can a killer and liar be considered a hero? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taşçıoğlu. Thank you very much. Dr. Gwen, I have a question to you again.
Sure.
In the 1960s and following years, to what extent did Armenian radicalism was fed on this unctuous and sham trial?
There are several steps. The first is in the 1960s, because Tehliryan died of natural cause in 1960, and for the first time, the Armenian Revolutionary Federation decided to speak about Nemesis publicly in Western languages in detail. In 1953, the memoirs of Tehliryan had been published, but it was in Armenian and in Egypt. So it was only circulating among some members of the RAF. In 1960, hagiographic necrology was published in the Armenian Review in 4 parts in English. And actually, it was a beginning of proof that he lied during his trial, because you could see in the necrology that he was in Belgrade, that he joined the Russian army from Belgrade. And he did not act alone, as he was part of Nemesis. But the RAF felt the necessity to finally, after almost 40 years, to say, we did it. We did it. 1965, it's a year when the Armenian genocide allegations really emerge in the international field, I say. And the same year, Lindy Avakian published a book on Tehliryan, which is extremely anti-Turkish, as you can guess, but it also proves that Tehliryan did not say the truth in his trial. Of course, Lindy Avakian praised Tehliryan. Lindy Avakian does not call him a liar, but if you read the book carefully, you understand that his defense was based on lies. The second step was in the 1970s for several reasons. In 1972, an old Armenian from Iran, Gordan Yanikian, who was desperately looking for attention, was desperately looking for being famous, who had read the book of Lindy Avakian some years ago, decided to assassinate Mehmet Baydar and Bahadır Demir in an ambush. And all his defense was modeled on the defense of Tehliryan. Gordan Yanikian claimed he was from Erzurum. As I said, he was from Iran. Gordan Yanikian claimed his brother was killed by Turks in Erzurum in 1885. He never had any brother. And Gordan Yanikian claimed he was a volunteer of the Russian army, and actually he spent the World War in Moscow. And even more strikingly, Gordan Yanikian never was interested in Armenian nationalism and Armenian issue until mid-1960s. He was a writer in 1940s, 50s. He even wrote an article for the Dashnak Armenian Review. But before 1965, this forced relocation, the human tragedy, etc., was completely out of his interest. He was fascinated by the example of Tehliryan, and he killed to become a hero. And Yannickian was used as an inspiration by the Armenian Secret Army for liberation of Armenia. The Asala was created in 1971 without name. The name was taken in 1975 in Lebanon. And something few people know is one of the main men, it was established by men only, one of the main men who established the Asala used as nom de guerre, as fake name, Agop Agopian. And Agop Agopian was a tribute paid to Shan Natali, because the real name of Shan Natali was Agop der Agopian. And Shan Natali was the IRF leader who supervised assassination of Talat. And even more remarkably, Shan Natali was excluded by the IRF in 1929 because he wanted to organize assassination of British and French statesmen. And the rest of the IRF leadership said, this is suicidal, we all will finish on the gallows if we do that. And Shan Natali said, it doesn't matter, we have to do it. So the very birth of the Asala is in continuity with the south of Shan Natali after 1929. To say we have to attack the Turks, of course, but we have to attack the West as well. And actually, Tehliryan supported the dissidents of Shan Natali at its beginning, for reasons we completely ignore today, except the Dashnaks, of course, but they will not tell us. Tehliryan returned to the IRF, became again a good Dashnak, but we don't know why. And to finish with the Asala, the clearest example of inspiration taken from the Tehliryan trial was the assassination of Mehmet Savaş Yelgüz, the secretary of the Turkish consulate in Geneva, by Mardiros Jamgochian in 1981. 1981, it's not a coincidence, it's because it was the 60th anniversary of Talat Paşa's assassination. And it's the only case, as far as I know, of an assassination of a Turkish diplomat by an Asala terrorist who stayed instead of fleeing. So Mardiros Jamgochian received the order to be arrested. And his friends told him, your trial will be a kind of new Tehliryan trial. And actually, the counsel of Mardiros Jamgochian, Patrick de Vecchio, centered his argumentation on the justification of terrorism in general and of this assassination in particular. And we could also say that the early bombing was implementation of Shan Natali's ideas, but I will skip that. The other kind of people who have been inspired is, of course, the Armenian Revolutionary Federation itself, because the Congress of the IRF taking place in Vienna in December 1972 decided to return to terrorist activities. The attacks began in October 1975 with the assassination of the National Eagle in Vienna, of Ismail Elez and his driver in Paris, the same month. And actually, during the months before this assassination, the Armenian Weekly, the Dashnak newspaper of Boston, had published a series of articles on Nemesis, which was obviously not a coincidence. They perfectly knew what was going on. So regarding more specifically the inspiration of Tehliryan, the best example probably is the trial of Max Reyer-Kinjian in Aix-en-Provence in 1982. Kinjian tried to kill the Turkish ambassador in Bern in January 1980. And Kinjian did not stay in Sweden. Kinjian went back to France, but Kinjian did not make any effort to avoid arrest. He rented a car under his real name, for example. So it was very easy for the police to find who did that. And the trial was well prepared. It was supposed to take place in 1981, not a coincidence. It actually happened in January 1982, but it is just a detail. And in 1981 too, the RAF published a translation into French of the proceedings of the Tehliryan trial, which is obviously not a coincidence. That having been said, the trial of Kinjian was not only inspired by the Tehliryan trial, because this time they purely and simply threatened to lynch the judges and the jury to be sure that Kinjian will be found guilty only as an accessory and not as the main perpetrator. So the inspiration was more, in this specific case, the trial of Minas Torlakian in Istanbul in 1821, because I found in the diary of Admiral Bristol that the British judges received death threats. This is the Dashnak methods. But to finish with the RAF, two more remarks. The very name of the terrorist branch was a direct reference to Nemesis, because the first name was Justice Commandos for the Armenian Genocide. It was when you are from a Dashnak culture, or when you know that, you understand that it was a reference to Nemesis. And Ampik Sassounian, a terrorist you mentioned, has taken a photo of himself, Margaret has asked a friend to make a photo of himself in front of the memorial monument of Tehliryan, some days or some weeks before assassinating Turkish Consul General Kemal Arikan. You could not find a clearer inspiration. Just to finish, to answer your question, even today, I mean, the day before yesterday, Tehliryan was celebrated in Lyon by the young Dashnaks, by the RAF North Round, and even more incredibly, by the teenager branch of the RAF. So kids of 15, 16 years old are taught in praising a man who killed another man who was not even armed. Killed from behind. You see, no baby is born to hate. Hatred comes from education. And with the glorification of Tehliryan, we have a quintessential example. I assume there are examples in the US, but I did not have time to check for the very last days.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goen. Very good wordings. Thank you very much. Dr. Taşçıoğlu, I have a question to you. Can you please tell us about the reactions of the German public and the German press against the court decision concerning Talat Paşa's murder?
Okay, Dr. Atun. After the court decision, many articles criticizing the trial procedure were published in the German press. I will give some examples. Takvishe Şahı newspaper of June 4, 1921. A herd of Turkish enemies were given the right to express themselves before the court. On the other hand, the German prosecutor did not even give a chance to listen to those who could testify in favor of the Ottoman state and explain that the Ottoman Empire had no other option but to relocate Armenians collaborating with the invading Russian armed forces. Thus, Deutsche Abendblatt newspaper of June 3, 1921. Today, the jury members gave a verdict of not guilty in the case against the Armenian Soğomon Tehliryan, who murdered Talat Paşa. This was followed by the acquittal of the accused. Thus, the murder of a man was acquitted by a German court, despite the fact that the victim was a loyal ally of German Empire. The method followed by the judiciary in this case is not acceptable for a discerning person. Murder is murder. The title of the Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung newspaper dated June 4, 1921 is Murderer Acquitted. The defenders of the murderer probably felt instinctively that if they used the trial process skillfully and gave eloquent speech, the jury members would acquit the murderer, and that this decision has no legal basis. Deutsche Tageszeitung of June 4, 1921. This murder took place on German soil and went unpunished. Germany was known as a constitutional state until today. But now, suddenly people of faraway lands are allowed to settle their personal quarrels on German soil. Therefore, if one day Montenegrins and Albanians decide to carry over their family disputes and blood feuds to German soil, this should not be considered as a miracle. Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung of June 8, 1921. A German court acquitted the murderer of a prominent Turkish statesman, and the Berlin public treated as a hero. Tehliryan, who can find a house for himself across from Talat Paşa's house so skillfully, and has no criminal liability, still wanders freely in Berlin without facing any obstacles. If he once again wants to test the pleasure of satisfying his supposed feelings of revenge without fear, has any action been taken to prevent? The Tehlikeli Ruşa newspaper of June 4, 1921. The defense did whatever it took to create an atmosphere suitable for the murderer Tehliryan, with great skill, even bringing monks from Manchester. By the way, one of the heaviest criticisms of the decision appeared in the Der Reitwart newspaper of June 11, 1921. It is impossible to understand this decision, which must be met with the deepest sorrow. The act of murder and the melodramatic treatment to which the killer was subjected during the trial are embarrassing. The means and methods used to conceal the political character of the murder were so rude and childish that the jury members were also fooled and acquitted the murderer. This will not be a glorious page for German justice. All Germans with a nationalist consciousness are deeply saddened and ashamed of the Berlin decision. All these examples show that the German court tried to exonerate Germany from the accusations by acquitting the murderer Tehliryan, and that, unfortunately, Talat Paşa did not choose the right country for asylum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taşçıoğlu. Very good news, very good news from the old papers, just making everything very clear. Thank you very much. Dr. Gwen, is there anything you would like to add?
A few things, a short remark and some recommendation. The short remark is Émile Doumergue, a French Protestant minister who wrote for the Armenian cause during and right after the war, commented the Tehliryan affair in saying that what Tehliryan did was horrible, even if, of course, Doumergue did not like Talat at all. But he said if everybody has the right to take revenge in killing, after some months, nobody will remain on earth, which I think is a very reasonable way of thinking, no matter what we may think about other statements of Pastor Doumergue. Regarding the Tehliryan case and the assassination of Talat in general, I think we did more researches in various archives. Okay, the archives of the RAF are more than difficult to reach, but the US archives are open, the British archive are open, except the intelligence report, but soon it will be available. For example, as I said, Tehliryan had a life until 1960, including a political life, and very few things are done on that. And something I discovered when I was making my PhD, curiously, strangely, at the end of 1920, so during the time of Nemesis activities, the RAF and some elements of the NSHAC planned to assassinate French generals, officers, in Adana and Beirut. Is there a link between that and Nemesis? It seems very probable, but we did more research on that. And in some, we need translation of Tehliryan memoirs with critical notes and comments, what is right, what is not right in his memoirs, and the same for Talat Paşa's memoirs, because it exists. The full text of his memoirs exists in modern Turkish only, which is not sufficient. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you, Dr. Gwen. Dr. Taşçıoğlu, is there anything or any remarks you want to add?
Sure, Rilo. German officials know very well the facts on the Armenian allegations, but they still insist on accusing Turks with committing genocide to the Armenians to alleviate their own genocidal past. This attitude stems from efforts to conceal the Armenian Nazi cooperation during the Second World War and ease the pressure on Germany by finding partners in the crime of Namibia and Jewish genocide they committed. Nowadays, the German administration is trying to suppress the patriotism and nationalist feelings of the Turks living in Germany and embarrass them, creating a sense of guilt through the so-called Armenian genocide allegations in order to make them a quieter group within the German society. It is impossible for a Turk who questions the genocide thesis to find a job in the media, politics, and academia. Discrimination policies are also being applied against Turkish students who deny the genocide claims. Turkish student Ezgi, who was studying at a school in Stuttgart, was labeled as Turkish Nazi by her classmates after her rejection of the Armenian genocide allegations put forward by the German teacher and was suspended from the school. Turkish students who are not allowed to speak Turkish even among themselves in schools are largely deracinated from their roots by the abolition of Turkish lessons in many states. Germany has also started to include the genocide allegations in the textbooks since 2002. These practices of Germany are against the UN resolutions to stop hate speech and the UNESCO's criteria to eliminate prejudices and stereotypes against other nations or certain groups. Therefore, German authorities should put an end to these unlawful practices. If they do not end these practices, a lawsuit must be filed against the German Ministry of Education to remove the statements accusing the Turks from the German textbooks. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taşçıoğlu, for your remarks and comments. Thank you both, Dr. Gwen and Dr. Taşçıoğlu. It was an excellent panel. I would like to share my views and suggestions on this issue and the results we have achieved in this panel. I would like to convey my sincere thanks to Dr. Gwen and Associate Professor Dr. Taşçıoğlu for their participation. And I close down today's panel. Thank you all again.
Thank you.